All right. So hi everyone. My name is Rochelle Ma. I'm the resource coordinator with NAMI San Francisco, and I also happen to be helping lead the youth council this year. And it has been an absolute pleasure working with this amazing group of high school and college students. For the past several months, we've been working on different types of activities and events to uplift youth voices and to be able to normalize talking about mental health conditions. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our moderator for this evening. So we have the amazing Hailie. So Hailie is a psychology student at San Francisco State University. At her campus, she also interns with the Queer and Trans Resource Center, where she finds and provides resources for students. She has been a volunteer with NAMI through the Youth Council and support groups. In her free time, Hailie loves to curl up with a good book or theorize about her most recent psychology interest. Hailie is excited to facilitate the discussion with her peers and lift up their voices around mental health. So Hailie, I'll let you take it from here to lead the rest of the conversation tonight.
Thank you so much for introducing me, Rochelle. Hi, everyone. Good evening. I appreciate you all for being here. I'm going to start by introducing our panelist, Charlotte. Charlotte is a high school sophomore. At 12 years old, she founded the Community Photo Booth, a nonprofit organization that uses the photography for philanthropy, and has since raised over $30,000 for invisible needs around the world. In 2020, the Community Photo Booth helped relaunch the NAMI San Mateo counties Ending the Silence program and created a youth mental health documentary that was featured on the Drew Barrymore Show. Charlotte also serves on the San Mateo County Behavioral Health Commission and was inducted into the George Dolores Mental Health Hall of Fame. Her passion for community advocacy and combating mental health stigma stems from her personal experience of suicide loss. In her free time, Charlotte loves playing soccer and runs a bi-weekly philosophy discussion group at her school. Charlotte can now introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for that introduction, Hailie. My name is Charlotte, as Hailie mentioned. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a high school student from the San Francisco Bay Area, and when I was in middle school, I lost my dad to suicide, and going through that personal experience of loss led me into the space of mental health advocacy. Over the pandemic, I became aware of how many peers of mine were struggling from mental health challenges themselves. And so that ultimately led me to be here with you all today and, share my experiences, share the experiences my friends have, that belong to my friends and that belong to my family. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. We're so glad you're here and sharing your story. Our next panelist is Emily. Emily Schmitt is a first-year nursing student at Dominican University of California. She enjoys driving, photography, and spending time with her friends in her free time. Emily is the founder and president of Dominican's first chapter of Active Minds. Active Minds is a national organization that supports mental health awareness and education for young adults. She held club events such as throwing plates, talking about worries from that week, and handing out affirmations to the school community. Emily's inspiration comes from her personal experience with mental health challenges, as well as her friends' experiences. Having gone through several different treatment programs, several different types of treatments, she wants to educate others on the different types of help you can receive and hopes through this, others will feel less alone. Emily, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, thank you, Hailie. My name is Emily. I use she, her pronouns. I am looking forward to sharing my story here tonight, mostly from personal experiences, as well as those who I've met along my journey.
Thank you so much, Emily. We're so glad you're here. So for an agenda for tonight, we're going to start with some questions and we'll have 10 minutes at the end for any questions from the audience. So if you want to think of a question, you can hold on to it and save it for the last 10 minutes. Our first question for the evening is going to be for Charlotte first. And it is, what are things that positively impact your mental health and what things that negatively impact your mental health?
Yeah, thank you so much, Hailie, for the questions. I think for me personally, what positively impacts my mental health has really, I would say, two main things. Number one is learning to be vulnerable. And what I mean by that is trying to build stronger relationships with friends and family. And for me, I've learned to do this through, feeling more comfortable crying in front of other people. And I know this is a very specific thing to say, but I felt that even over the last few years, coming out of the pandemic and after my dad passed away, it was a way for me to heal by, letting my wall down, as you can say, and learning to cry in front of people. And so through these interactions I've had with people, I've become closer with teachers, with friends, by just opening up and sharing my experiences. And through that, I've learned to build this support system. I'd say the second thing that positively impacts my mental health is building stop signs, as you can say, into my day-to-day life. So for me, that looks like taking breaks for fun, doing a puzzle, reading. Sometimes it can even just be folding laundry. Like sometimes the monotony of folding clothes is in a way relaxing. And then another way I build a stop sign, as I like to say, into my day-to-day life is through exercise. I love taking walks with my dog and just getting out in nature. I think for me, that's always a good way to reset the day. To the second question of what negatively impacts my mental health, I think for me, especially growing up with access to social media, I think it's definitely one of the biggest things is comparison rabbit holes, as I like to say. On whether that's on Instagram, comparing how I look, my body to other people, or on, LinkedIn, comparing status or stats to others. I know that for me, it's so easy to just fall down those rabbit holes. And the thing about social media platforms is that they continue to promote more content that almost exacerbate your insecurities. So I've learned to try to build a healthier relationship with social media in that sense. And then I think it also can extend beyond social media as well. FOMO is a real thing. It's something that, I'm no stranger to. And, I sometimes feel like, oh, I'm feeling isolated from friends, when in reality, sometimes it is important just to reach out, schedule time to hang out with people that you love. So I'd say those are really the things that have the biggest impact on my mental health, and at the same time are things I'm learning to build healthier relationships around.
Thank you, Charlotte, for sharing. I love your piece about a stop sign. That's actually something I've never heard before. Emily, would you like to answer the same question?
Hi, yes, thank you. I'd like to piggyback off of what Charlotte said about going on walks, being in nature. I recently broke my foot and I haven't been able to go out into nature, and it's been a bummer because it's been so nice outside. So next time when I get my boot off, I will definitely not take walking for granted. I also think talking with family and friends, I used to never really open up to anybody, and that didn't lead to anywhere good. So talking to different people, and through my journey, I've met a lot of different people, which has been nice, and that, an eye-opening experience of what other people go through. I started reading. I used to hate reading, but in the last year and a half, I've been really getting into nonfiction reading. For example, it's called Get Me Out of Here, and it's a book about borderline personality disorder. And it was the first time I really felt like I could be seen in a book. There's not great representation for a lot of different mental illnesses out there, and which is sad because it gives this awful connotation. I mean, my friend today just said, I like watching movies about crazy people. And it's that's kind of ingrained into our society today. I'm also a big fan of comedy shows, watching funny videos, watching TV shows that are funny instead of dramatic kind of gets me in a different mood and can kind of pull me out if I'm spiraling. On a different note, things that don't help my mental health are, I'd say, not getting outside, not connecting with anybody, watching sad TV shows or sad music. I know one of my friends really, really likes sad music, and I think it's good for a little bit, a period of time. But I think the lyrics can kind of take you down as well because sometimes they can just be super relatable. And watching the news has been a big one. It makes me, it makes me very sad when I watch the news because there's not a lot of good news being reported. So I try to stay away as much as I can. And then I try not to stay in bed as much as I can, just because that can kind of lead into me just, not getting up and not doing the things that I need to do or feel like, I need to get done.
Thank you, Emily. I found it so interesting how things that are really positive for you, the exact opposite shows the negative effect in your mental health. It's such an interesting idea. Now, I'd like to pose a question to Charlotte. You elaborated a bit on this earlier, but in the spectrum from positive impacts to negative impacts on your mental health, where would social media fall, or would you like to elaborate anything else?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, Hailie. I think it's a really nuanced question because you ask one person and they'll tell you, oh, I spend 4 hours a day on TikTok. Then you ask another person and they use a totally different social media platform for a totally different amount of time. And they're both impacted in different ways. Even if they spend the same amount of time on one platform or use the same platform, they might have different effects, different takeaways. I think something I'd like to elaborate more on from my previous response was the personalization algorithms that are embedded into social media and how I know that has had an effect and how that has impacted people, teenagers, high school students, of my age. For me, the year after my dad passed away, this was the year when COVID hit. And so it was kind of like a double whammy for me, in which I was spending all my time at home going through that grieving process pretty much alone. And so I spent a lot of time on social media, more so than I have in any other part of my life. And I remember that when I was on YouTube or when I was on Instagram, I would always get this content that was really negative or that was showing off people having amazing lives. And I think that's really the danger of social media. And it's what I said earlier, is that it really exacerbates your insecurities, makes you keep scrolling. I had a friend in middle school who was suffering from an eating disorder. And I remember that at a certain point, she would always freak out when we would open up her Instagram app on her phone. And I realized now, looking back, that the reason why she was so uncomfortable when we looked on her Instagram, for example, was because all of her content was related to working out or how bodies were looking. And so I realized that, everyone's social media personalized feed is really tailored to their own insecurities. And it's really scary to think that we're really just digging people further down into their mental health challenges or whatever they're experiencing. And so I've learned to keep, a healthy distance from social media. And I've learned to also check in with my friends. I think what's great about social media is that often you are using it to connect with people that you see in your day-to-day life. So I think inevitably, I think my friends and I will be social media users for however long social media exists. But the fact that we can see each other in person and check in that way is really important. So I think, yeah, social media is a tool if used and if used mindfully, and we can use it to check in with friends as well.
Thank you, Charlotte. I love hearing your ideas about using social media as a tool and how it affects connection. Emily, I'd love to hear where you believe social media falls on the list.
Yeah, similar to what Charlotte was saying, I think one of the good things about social media is the connection aspect. Sometimes there's people that you can talk to that you would never meet in, face to face, because there's just not, they have different, they live somewhere else, or you just don't come into contact with them. So that's a positive. I will say that I think the negatives outweigh the positives for social media. Specifically, I'd say the two main platforms I use or used to use were Instagram and TikTok. When TikTok was big during the pandemic is when I first started like really getting into it. And like, like all my friends, I would be scrolling, and just that's what I would do with my day, because I mean, we weren't able to really do anything else. So I would spend a lot of time on TikTok, and I noticed, I mean, looking back at it, as my mood got worse, so did my reels in my feed. Things started to pop up that would, you know, make my mood worse. It wouldn't be those funny videos anymore. There would be people who, are laughing, saying, I'm so depressed, and it gives this different image of what it actually is. I think there was a lot of, and there still is a lot of glamorization of mental illness. I think especially around our age, it's like a cool or trendy thing to have some of these, what they think are some of the symptoms of mental illness. And I mean, even on TikTok, there would be, they have these warnings that, they'll take things down for specific things. But I mean, on there were pictures of people like in the hospital. There were, pictures of, they would give like very specific ways of like, if they attempted suicide, they would say exactly what they did, or they would show very like graphic pictures. And I remember when I was first hospitalized in November of 2021, and I remember going through that whole process of being admitted, and, I was thinking like, oh, like this is just normal. Like I've seen so many other people, on social media go through this, and I was like, oh, like this is fine. It's not that big of a deal. But they weren't showing, the dehumanizing process, and, you're being watched like zoo animals, you're not really treated as a person. And that's the reality that social media doesn't grasp, that it's not just being sad or having, a couple bad days or being in a bad mood. It's so much more than that. And I think a lot of people have, started self-diagnosing off of, a couple videos they've seen about, overcoming depression, or things that, it's a lifelong struggle. It's not like, oh, I was depressed, one day, and then, it's just not how that works. And I think even when I first started having some more serious mental health struggles, I thought, oh, this is just like, this isn't the rest of my life. This is just like, this will be a couple weeks, because that's what I'd seen on the internet. They were going through a hard time, what they call depressed, and then they were fine in like a week. So I think I do think social media has a place. I'm just not sure that, I feel like there needs to be a little bit more of a filter. I made a private account where I follow people that, I really actually want to see pictures from. And that's mostly what I use now.
Thank you, Emily, for sharing. You had such a powerful response about the glamorization of mental health and how misconstrued information can be. Thank you so much. We're going to pivot to another question, a bit in a different realm. So, Charlotte, I would like to ask, how did your family respond to your struggles and challenges with mental health and you seeking out treatment?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Hailie. So for me, I've never been diagnosed with a mental health challenges. So I've never received any formal treatment in terms of mental health. But I do know that when I was struggling, and I have an older brother as well, and I know after my dad passed away, during that whole year where we were all at home because of COVID, one thing that my family prioritized was getting together, plopping ourselves down on the couch and just talking things out. And sometimes it would just be sitting there in silence, holding space for each other. But I think it was really important for us during that time to have a space where we could, if needed, come forward about what we were going through. And often that was things that I couldn't even put vocabulary on. As I mentioned, I'm not diagnosed with anything, and I don't go to therapy because for me, I think my family in a way, or my mom really has become, as I like to say, like my personal therapist. So I think I'm really grateful that, I have that kind of relationship with my family and my mom now. So I think after losing my dad, we, as a unit of three, just got closer.
Thank you, Charlotte. That was so amazing to hear that you guys had such connection during that time. Emily, I'd like to ask the same question.
Yeah, thank you, Charlotte, for sharing. My family first has been a huge support through all of this, which is, I'm very grateful for. Not just my parents, but also my siblings have really been there. I wasn't very open with my mental health struggles until the pandemic, and more so in the last year or so. I'm not sure, people told me to go to therapy, and it was, suggested, but it's suggested a couple times, but I said no, like, I'm fine, like, I'll be fine. Because I didn't know how much I was actually struggling. And so eventually when it all kind of hit very aggressive, which is kind of why now when I talk to my friends and they, start going through like similar things, I'm like, you got to get ahead of this, not get ahead of it. You need to like do something about it now before it gets really bad, where like you're digging yourself out of a hole that like is just really hard to get out of. And not everybody has the support or resources to get out of that. So that's, so I'm very grateful for my support systems.
Thank you for sharing, Emily. I imagine, myself included, that a lot of people have similar experiences to what you went through and can really resonate. Charlotte, you mentioned that you had those moments of connection. Was there anything you wished was different or changed during that time?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Hailie. It's actually a question that, I've asked myself many times now. So for me, I struggled during the, year or two following my dad's passing with coming forward about my experiences. I know that in many other families, when such a tragedy like occurs, often people will talk about it at a community level, or you'll let the school know, you'll notify your teachers, you'll notify close friends. And for my family, I guess you could say are more on the private side. And so we ended up not telling anyone what had happened. And I think part of that is due to the stigma around suicide. In fact, I mean, I think it was entirely due to the stigma around suicide. We did not tell pretty much anyone that my dad had passed away, and if so, it was only sharing a few details. And so I felt like going into those, few years following his death, that was very much going through an invisible struggle where I couldn't really show people what was going on because no one would understand unless I told them the full story. It was almost like I wasn't allowed to be sad. I wasn't allowed to cry in front of friends. And what I've learned is that, it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to not have a perfect situation and to have a perfect family or a perfect household. I've learned, and really this has been my biggest takeaway, is like, and I mentioned this previously, is learning to let my walls down, and just let people know. I think for a long time I thought it would be a burden to people if I talked about what I was struggling with, and that they wouldn't care, or they'd somehow, get mad at me. And I know this is what Emily mentioned, like there's this whole idea around glamorizing like struggles and mental health challenges in the young generation. And so I often thought like, oh, if I, text my friend, hey, I'm sad, would they think I'm joking? Like, would they think I'm just trying to get attention? And it's really sad that that's a lot of the thoughts that go through people's heads now when they do have struggles. So really for me, I've learned to put those doubts aside, and when I need a person to talk to, that I come forward and reach out to friends. And as I mentioned, I think I've done more crying that I have in my entire life in the last few months, because I've made an effort to just be more open about my own story, and which is why I'm speaking here today.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. And we're so glad that you're here speaking today. I loved hearing about your biggest takeaway being vulnerability. It's such a impactful skill to have and thing to learn about. Emily, I'll pose the same question. How do you wish people responded to struggles and challenges with mental health or seeking out treatment?
Yeah, thank you for asking. Thank you, Charlotte, for sharing. I've also thought about this quite a bit, almost like, what happened, or, where could things have been caught earlier. And don't think that I don't think that it's useful for me looking back about what could have been done, because that just, puts me in a really bad headspace. It makes me feel really guilty. And also I think, my family, they can have some guilt about everything that's happened, and like if they could have done something more. And I don't think that they really could have done anything. I was pretty secretive about it. I should go into acting because apparently, I'm a really good actor. So it was like I was just a different person. And so that I'm not sure that they could have done anything different, but I know now that they're all putting in a lot of effort. That's my family. My friends I haven't been as open with. I think Charlotte said something, learning to, put my walls down has been a really big challenge. It's hard to know what people actually really want to know, and what they think, what they'll think about you afterwards and how it'll affect them. The burden piece also really resonated, like Charlotte said, not feeling like I want to inconvenience someone. Or I was talking to someone the other day about, I have chronic migraines, and I was talking to her about one of the treatments I'm doing, and she got like super scared and couldn't really handle it. And so I kind of had to take a step back and start, sugarcoating what I say, because that's kind of what people in the media think. And so it's hard when it's so different, kind of like, on social media, it's so different than what it is in real life. So I think that's mostly it.
Thank you, Emily, for shedding a light on some of your experiences and how you wished people would respond. So, Charlotte, I'm going to ask, what recovery and coping strategies worked or are working for you?
Yeah, gosh, I think for me, the recovery and coping strategies have really helped me get through the last few years is yeah, being out in nature. I think a lot of things that were mentioned previously, yeah, being out in nature, uh, getting exercise. I think something that has not been mentioned yet is sleep. Sleep has played a huge role in me just having better well-being in my day-to-day life. I think getting enough sleep at night is so important to how I feel the next day. And I think a lot of people overlook sleep as a treatment strategy, because it's something that, we all do as humans. But I know that for, friends that and even my dad, I remember people telling me that one thing that played into his depression when he was suffering was not getting enough sleep. And I don't not to bring this back to his life, but something that I learned was that, like, in the weeks leading up to his passing, he actually was not getting much sleep. And so you can also read research papers and look at studies, and there is a correlation between sleep and mental health challenges. So I know that for me, being someone who a teenager, and a lot of people my age don't get enough sleep. And I used to think, oh, it's fine. I'm going to do better on my test because I'm studying an extra hour. That's going to outweigh the harms of not getting that extra hour of sleep. But I really learned that there's a lot of invisible benefits, even to just getting that extra hour. So I think, yeah, sleep is a really important strategy. Whether you are diagnosed with a mental health challenge or not, I think it's part of our well-being.
Thank you, Charlotte. Sleep is so important and it can be easily forgotten too. Emily, what recovering and coping strategies worked or are working for you?
Yeah, I really like what Charlotte was saying. I hadn't thought about that, but sleep. I definitely noticed that when my depression is worse, it's weird because I want to stay in bed all day and do nothing, but I just lie there. I don't sleep. And so my sleep kind of goes the opposite. Like I don't sleep enough. Where some people they sleep too much, but it's hard because I'll be so tired, but still not able to sleep, which can be really tough. As for coping strategies, I'm very grateful that I've been able to learn a lot of coping strategies throughout the last year and a half. I did several different treatments different treatment centers that really gave me some skills. I've been doing a lot of DBT, that's a lot of that specific type of therapy. And when I was in one of my residential programs, and a big component was, let's make a list of coping strategies. And when things get tough, you have this note card to look back on, and they're things that you're actually going to do. And so, when I'm feeling, my emotions are super escalated, it's getting ice or putting a ice pack on the back of my wrist or my head. And so, or splashing my face with cold water, things like that I wouldn't have thought about. And like I said, I'm grateful that I now know some of those tips and tricks that I want to share with other people, because I don't think they're very well known to, if you haven't gone through different types of treatment.
Thank you, Emily, for sharing. I think it can be so easy to forget like good coping strategies. And I love your idea of putting everything on like a note card to easily reference. Um, that's just genius. Now that we've heard a bit about coping strategies, Charlotte, would you like to share some treatments and resources that worked for you?
Yeah, thank you. I think I'm not sure if I'm going to be the best person to answer this question because, as I mentioned, I'm not diagnosed with a mental health challenge. And so I think the things that I'll mention is just for me to help my well-being. I think for me, it's really been finding online communities that are safe and supportive. And I want to clarify that this is in a way not related to social media. I mean, in many senses, you can kind of refer to these forums and places as social medias in a sense. But for me, like finding there's an online forum out there for people who have gone through a significant loss. And so I've found community in spaces like those where even if it's not direct interaction between people, it's even just a forum where you can see other people posting about their stories and experiences. And I know many people think that, oh, well, reading about someone else's life or reading about someone else's challenges might just worsen yours. And I think in ways it can, and it really depends on the person. I think for me, learning about other people's experiences around suicide has only helped me strengthen my voice around my story. So I think for me that has been really helpful, is to join these online communities and forums where I know that the other people there have gone through something similar. I think other resources that have really helped me are different organizations in the area. I mean, NAMI, most of all, has been an incredible resource to me. I know at NAMI San Mateo County and NAMI San Francisco, there are so many different programs that are for youth. In fact, the Youth Council has been an amazing group. So I know that oftentimes it seems like, oh, there's no programs out there designed for kids like me or designed for minors, but I think you just have to dig around and you'll find amazing places like NAMI.
Thank you, Charlotte. I agree that NAMI is a great place for resources and great for young adults as well. Emily, do you have any treatment resources that worked for you?
Yeah, like I had mentioned before, some of the coping strategies I had learned were I did a couple different residential treatment programs. And like I said, I had learned a lot there. A big thing that I also focused on once I moved on from that type of treatment was finding community in, I guess, where you would like least expect it. Like I'd say one of my best friends is someone I met like in some program that was, it was like an 8 to 3 mental health program. And, we would only see each other, before and during lunch, but we kept in touch and we see each other, as often as we can. And sometimes, you go into those programs and you're like, I'm going to meet nobody. Everyone's going to be super cliquey. And it's going to be like those movies where you're going to be left out. But the whole idea is that no one gets left out and things like that, where, there might be certain like groups, but you'll fit in somewhere. It doesn't always seem like you will, but there's somebody out there who is going to resonate, which is what I realized starting the Active Minds Club here. So Active Minds is a national non-for-profit organization that helps promote and educate mental health awareness specifically for young adults, mostly in 18, college, high school age, which has been, super specific, which is nice because I'm in college right now. And I made this questionnaire that asked like, what would they like to be seen at the meetings? And there were people writing down, depression, anxiety, eating disorders. And it's like, they're out there struggling, but it's so hard to find someone who will talk about it, and it just increases the stigma, and it also increases just how alone you feel, because then you're like, well, no one else is going through it. And that's I'd say one of the best parts about doing some mental health programs, whether it's residential where you live there or programs where you're able to go home at night. But the community that I was able to make in residential, because I was living with these people, was amazing. The connection you make is just, it's so vulnerable, and I'm still in touch with them, and you're able to share things that you probably never would. And so that sense of community, I think, is really important to be brought to different places, outside of, everybody needs a community so they feel like they're part of.
Thank you, Emily. I think it's so interesting how both of you reference community as one of your primary treatments and resources. So now that we've talked about that, let's go into our final question, which is, what are you hopeful for in the future about your own mental health journey? Charlotte, could you answer first?
Yeah, I think for me I'll build off exactly what you said, Hailie, and what Emily you said beautifully is, yeah, building a community, a stronger community through this whole process. I think there's a lot of people out there in the world that you might not realize share a similar experience. For me, I thought I was the only one going through what I was going through, but it really only took a few, online forums, support groups, a youth council here at NAMI to realize that other people have very similar experiences. And by meeting these people, I think it's all about just finding that common humanity. And so I've found and so fortunate to have been able to meet all these amazing people and grow my network in that sense of people who I know are there to support me and who I'm there to support going forward. So I'm hopeful that, in 10 years looking back, I can look back at it not with sadness, not with disappointment or frustration, but with, satisfaction and feeling good about the path that I took and the people that I met along the way.
Thank you, Charlotte. I think your vision for the future is just so inspiring. Emily, what are you hopeful for?
Yeah, I like what Charlotte said about the, not looking back, the path forward for the next couple of years, and not having any regrets. And something similar, sometimes it's hard to look into the future, especially with some mental health challenges. It can be hard to, see this future where you're unstuck, or especially when you're hopeless. Like there'll never be a future where I'm feeling better. And so what has been helpful is advocating. That's also helped with the community piece. And I now have more people that I trust, and I have providers that I actually trust, because before I didn't really have a relationship with, one of my therapists, but now I feel like I can be honest with my providers, which I think is essential. And I think just having more of a conversation about it, and a more of a realistic conversation about it, where it's the reality. It's not this, Instagram perfect, running through fields, I'm feeling so much better type of picture.
Thank you, Emily. I love your vision of realism and being honest about how things are, not the idealized version on the internet. Thank you guys so much for answering all our questions. I'd like to open it up to the room if there's any Q&A. I see we have one question already from Renee. It looks like this is for Emily. So the question is, what advice do you have for after you leave the residential or IOP program? How did you find community after those programs ended?
Hi, yeah, thank you, Renee, for asking this question. It's something that I definitely really struggled with because you are in such a tight-knit community from, especially from residential. I mean, you're living with these people, you're seeing them, 8, 9, 10 hours a day, and you're sharing, your deepest, darkest secrets. And so it's hard to find that level of vulnerability out in not residential worlds, because I became so accustomed to that when I got home and people were just having conversations about like what to eat for dinner. And it was so strange because that just wasn't what we were talking about. We were just talking about so many different deep topics where like mundane things seem really kind of strange. And so as for finding community, I looked up NAMI, which is what I found. I also looked into Active Minds. I looked for support groups. I do a support group for chronic migraines, which has been really helpful. And so these are all mostly found online. I did some research, to find places where I feel like I could fit in, but it's definitely a very hard transition. And finding those people, they're definitely out there. It's just digging around a little bit, which can be frustrating, but you will find somewhere. If not NAMI, then there's support groups for almost anything. And now that we're online, it's so much easier to find things. You can go to a different state, on Zoom, and you can video in. And so I think that availability has been a big piece in finding a community after those types of treatments.
Thank you so much, Emily, for sharing your resources. I see we have a couple questions from Michelle. The first two are for Charlotte. So the first question for Charlotte is, can you describe your film?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Michelle, for the question. So back in September, Suicide Prevention Month of last year, I, with a group of friends at an organization that I run called the Community Photo Booth, made a youth mental health documentary called It's Time We Talk About It. You can find it on YouTube, and the motivation behind the documentary was really to respond to the suicide of Katie Meyer, the Stanford women's soccer team captain and goalie, who passed away in March of 2022. And when she passed away, remember it was all across the news nationally. Yet in my school community and in schools around the Bay Area, no one was talking about the suicide, and no one was really acknowledging the fact that this was a big problem. And for me, I lost my dad to suicide, and so after hearing about her death, it really was like I was reliving the experience again. So I went into the summer of that year deciding that I wanted to do something about it. And for me, I have experience doing photography. So I was like, well, I got cameras. I know friends who have cameras. Let's go and point our cameras at people who have stories to share, specifically youth with stories. And we basically compiled a documentary that contains 3 stories. One of them, I'm one of the people that share a story, and then there's 2 others. So it also features the LGBTQ plus community perspective, as well as the perspective of an athlete. So Katie Meyer's friend from Stanford. It's really all about just highlighting different youth experiences around mental health. And I encourage people to check it out. Thank you. Thank you for asking the question.
Thanks, Charlotte. We have one more question for you. Can Charlotte tell us whether or not talking about among her family was ethnicity, religious, cultural, or just stigma?
And just to clarify, is that question, do you mind actually repeating the question?
Yes. Can Charlotte tell us whether or not talking about it among her family was ethnicity, religious, cultural, or just stigma?
Okay. So I think when I'm assuming is the question is probably in response to talking about basically the experience that I went through with family and using that as a healing experience. I think for my family, the reason that I think it was really hard to talk about my dad's death and let people know was definitely stigma. I think, it's a good question because looking back, I think there was probably other factors. So I am half Chinese. My mom's side is Chinese. And so I know that in her family, she comes from an immigrant background. I could get into their whole story, but I know that for them, when they came to America, my mom, she learned to just work really hard, not talk about mental health. And I know in the AAPI community, there is a whole other conversation around stigma. And so I know for my mom, the way she handled my dad's passing was in many ways, don't talk about it, keep your head up high, hold back the tears, keep going. And I know that for me, like, I'm someone that likes to talk things out, to cry things out with friends. So in many ways, it felt like it was almost like suffocating not to, talk about what I was going through. So I think, it was there's probably definitely a component of my mom that was how we dealt with my dad's passing.
Thank you for sharing, Charlotte. I have one question for both of you from Michelle. Can you describe overall what you are seeing in terms of trends on mental health among their friends? Areas improving and getting worse? Emily, would you like to answer first?
Sure, that's a good question. Just to clarify, is it what I'm seeing with my friends or what I'm seeing on social media? Okay, on my friends. I'd say since I've, now that I'm in college, I'm seeing it more so in my friends, just as the stress tends to ramp up, so does, other things. And so, and in my high school, I don't think I talked to anybody about mental health. Like I would ask how other people are doing and they would just say fine. And so, I mean, that still happens now. So as much as, I can try to check in on that front, it's kind of hard. You don't want to pry. And so if people don't want to share, you can't make them. In college, what's really interesting is that I have, one of my friends actually uses some mental health terms pretty lightly, as in like depression or, things like that. I think I think I hear every day, like, I'm going to kill myself, probably from at least one person every day. I'll hear it, in school or not as much as social media, just because my content has shifted. But, I have so much homework to do, or like, I would rather do that than this. And so those types of phrases are what I'm hearing again. I mean, it was big in my high school, and now I'm starting to notice it more in college. And it's tricky because, people use it to be funny, but it's not, I think if you don't really understand what suicide is, they don't know what they're talking about. They're not seeing the behind the scenes of what's actually going on. And so I do think in college is more talked about. As I started the club, I'm hearing more stories, which has been really nice. And, I had someone come into the club and she was like, I don't have a lot of friends, and like this has been really nice. And so that type of community is what I'm working to create. And so yeah, it's good to say that there is a little bit more conversation. I definitely think it still has work. But thank you for your question.
Thank you, Emily. Charlotte, do you have a response?
Missed the unmute button for a second. Do you mind repeating the question?
Yes. So the question is, Can you describe overall what you are seeing in terms of trends on mental health amongst your friends? So areas improving and getting worse.
Hmm. Yeah, I think in middle school, my experience with mental health and what I saw among kids my age was it was kind of like there's two types of groups, or you were kind of one or the other. You were either someone who was very, very open about your mental health challenges. In many ways, it was almost like it was like a big part of your identity. And then on the other end, you'd have people who would not talk about it at all. And I think going back to actually the previous question that I was answering, I think it was related to perhaps cultural or even differences in people's personality. So I do think that people who, you know, might be more extroverted or just better at sharing and opening up about things in their lives, they tend to be people who, you know, are able to come forward or talk about mental health challenges more easily. And I think for people who are naturally more introverted, it's a lot more challenging. And so I think it's really important because I know in academia, for example, and in research even, what the data that they'll use in data science research papers of like studying trends in social media and depression, they'll only look at people who are posting on Twitter. They'll look at people who are posting all this content about, hey, you know, I'm depressed, all these things that they readily type and post to the public. But what I've noticed in terms of those like research studies, for example, is that what about people who just don't use Twitter? Or what about people who don't post to the public? You know, though their voices are not getting factored into the academia space or in, you know, like a lot of research I know that's being done on social media. And I think I'm just using that as an analogy for the real world, and that a lot of times, like, for example, people who attend these types of calls or maybe attend support groups, they might be just naturally more extroverted. And so I think there's a huge issue around trying to get the people who are just naturally more introverted, who can't really come forward about their challenges or don't know how to connect them with these resources. So that's just been something I've noticed, you know, in a middle school level, but also in a research level. Like, we need to remember that there is a huge population of folks who are hiding what they're going through. So we need to, you know, sometimes we need to seek them out because they might not come forward themselves.
Thank you, Charlotte. I love how you highlight the huge gap in research around this topic. We're going to close out with one last question, and the question is for both of you. I'll start with Emily. Any advice for what parents should and should not do for their teenagers' mental health?
Oh, that's a good question. It's hard because I can only see it from my side of, I can only see from my side of things. I get where, you know, looking back, I can see where my parents, you know, they were trying to do what was best what was best. And I'd say don't pressure them to talk if they don't want to talk. Sometimes, I mean, even now I'll be like, I don't want to talk, and you know, they're like in my face. And so just, you know, sometimes not talking is okay. Maybe giving them some resources for outlets. Some people like to write, or some people like to do like arts and crafts, you know, things like that. I know, I mean, even now I hate when people give me advice. So when I was a teenager, it was worse. And so I'd say just keep being there for them, because if they trust you, that's going to make a huge difference.
Thank you so much, Emily. Charlotte, do you have a response or do you need me to repeat the question?
I think I got the question. Thank you, Hailie. I think for parents, I'm actually going to reference an article that I read the other day, and it was about how teenagers, it was just this study someone did. It was a very interesting study because it was really all about just seeing when and in what situations would a teenager come forward or talk to their parent about just something that's very personal in their lives. And I think what the study found was that a lot of teens tend to open up, or the time of day that they open up tends to be right before bed. And they'll usually walk into like a parent's room and sit on the parent's bed, or right when the parent is about to fall asleep, that's when they'll come forward and like say like, hey mom, can I talk to you about something? And when I think seeing that in the chat, like I know that's something I realize I do a lot, is I'll kind of like ghost my family for the day, hide in my room, right when my mom is about to close her eyes, I'll like be like, mom, are you up? And then I'll like sit on her bed and be like, and I'll be like, mom, I have something to tell you. And I was really interested in like why this is the case, did some more reading. And I think really you all can guess, like teens want to feel like they're the ones controlling the conversation, like they're the ones kind of in power. And it's just like what Emily said, you don't want to be given advice to, you want to be the one doing the talking sometimes. So I think, I think as a parent, I mean, keep that in mind, that a lot of teens will enjoy or seek out opportunities where you might be about to fall asleep, or just in a position where like they feel like they're more so controlling the conversation. So just, I guess, be mindful of that. And my mom has learned that that's something I prefer. Like she always makes time, or maybe she just takes longer to fall asleep, but she seems to always be awake when I walk in at night. And we always do our little like 30-minute conversations and check in that way. And so that's become our routine. She used to try to make me like talk about my day at dinner. I think that's what all parents do, but at a certain point, just saying good gives the parent a signal. So my mom knows when I like to come forward, and that's usually before bed.
Thank you, Charlotte. I really resonated with that. I did that all the time as a teen. I would like to thank our panelists for sharing all their experiences today. And I'd like to thank all of you for being here today and hearing what we have to say at the Young Adult Roundtable. For some housekeeping and logistic things, I'm going to hand it over to Rochelle.
Awesome. Thank you, Hailie. I'm going to stop the recording now.